Wasn't that an interesting reading this morning? I had not heard that breakdown of the Hebrew in the Hebrew scriptures before. I took Spanish and Biblical Greek in divinity school. One of them is more useful than the other. Isn't it interesting, though, to know that Eve is referred to as him, Adam as they, and Noah as her, and that gender is so highly elastic in the Hebrew scriptures? We don't usually hear about that kind of thing from the scriptures. What we usually hear about, at least in the public square, is what some theologians call texts of terror. Texts of terror. Texts like the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Texts used to condemn, exclude, and even justify violence against certain people. It's been used that way against women, enslaved people, people of color, poor people, gay people. The scriptures have been used against unmarried people, and they've been used to prevent people from getting married. Pretty much any way you can think of. That's why I keep talking about them in here. However we feel about the Bible, it is everywhere in our society, and so it's important to know what it really says and doesn't say. It doesn't support discrimination against transgender people, and it even looks like the ancient name of God is a two-gender name. Now, I know some of us are still confused, probably many of us are still confused about what being transgender is all about. So I'm going to take a few minutes to break it down a little. And one really cool thing about understanding the concept of transgender is that it actually helps all of us understand our own gender better, whether we think of ourselves as trans or not. To understand gender, transgender, we need to understand 4 related concepts. And those are sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Sex, when it refers to whether someone is male or female, is the biological part of us. It's your anatomy, hormones, chromosomes. If you have 2 X chromosomes, you have the physiological features of a female, and you are therefore identified at birth as a girl. If you have 1 X and 1 Y, you have male parts, and you're identified as a boy. Occasionally, a person is born with 2 X chromosomes and a Y chromosome, XXY. When that happens, the baby is intersex. The baby's anatomy would probably be ambiguous in that case. As many as 1 in 100 or as few as 1 in 2,000 babies are intersex, where the exact numbers are hard to track down. But they show us that even biology doesn't always make sex clear. Next is sexual orientation. This one should be pretty familiar by now. Some people are attracted to the opposite sex, some to the same sex, some to both. Some don't experience any sexual attraction, and it's all just fine. Do your thing and don't accept any trouble about it. Now, gender identity. That's a little trickier. Your gender identity is an internal sense of yourself. It's the relationship between your body and your personal sense of whether you feel male, female, both, or neither. Gender identity is the way a person relates to their biological sex. While most people do feel that their gender is the same as their sex, a significant minority does not. Some are designated male at birth, but they have a deep sense within themselves, usually all their lives, that they are feminine or female. Some are designated female, but they identify more as masculine or male. Some people don't feel they are either male or female. Others feel they are both. Research has shown that most people have a clear sense of their gender identity from about age 4, though they may not have the language to express it right away. And this is where things get interesting, because gender is not actually a biological category. It's a cultural one. Culture teaches us that women are feminine and men are masculine, and it tries to keep femininity and masculinity separated strictly according to biological sex. But even among people who don't call themselves transgender, there's a lot of variation in how much a person's masculinity or femininity aligns with their biological sex. The other day I rewatched the movie Frida about the artist Frida Kahlo. When we imagine her, we tend to remember her dressed in traditional Mexican women's clothing of her time, but she was not conventionally feminine and once in a while, she wore a suit like a man. Gender often correlates with biological sex, but we can all see that masculinity and femininity are a vast spectrum, and they are not determined by biological sex. Depending on our sense of gender, we then develop our modes of gender expression. Gender expression is the outside part of gender. It's the way we present ourselves to the world. It's how we manifest that feeling of masculinity, femininity, both or neither, in dress, in behavior, in the way we speak. When Frida wore men's clothing, she was expressing or presenting masculinity. Culture teaches us the codes for gender expression. It teaches us what is masculine and what is feminine. In some cultures, it's masculine for men to wear robes, which is kind of like wearing a dress. In American culture, men wearing dresses is not the norm. But why? The theologian Patrick Chang writes that although there are definitely physical differences relating to biological sex, the significance of these differences in terms of gender identity is socially constructed. He says even though people may differ in terms of, say, hat size, that particular physical marker of difference has little or no relevance in everyday life. Similarly, there's no reason why a person's body parts must automatically determine everything from hair and clothing styles to preferred color, for example, pink versus blue, to family role and career choices. He says it's important to understand that the spectrum of behaviors normally associated with an individual's birth-assigned sex are actually a matter of social convention that is constantly changing. Expressing gender in a way that is incongruent with your internal sense of yourself is really awkward. Think of a tomboy who's forced to wear dresses and hates every minute of it. Do we have any of those former tomboys in the congregation? I know we have a lot of them. Or a masculine man being asked to wear nail polish. Think of how uncomfortable that might feel for him. Or the reverse, I don't like to go out in public in masculine clothing and no makeup. It just doesn't align with how I feel on the inside, and that misalignment is uncomfortable. And there are men who can't imagine expressing their gender in a hyper-masculine kind of way. It doesn't fit them. Sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression. Got it? More or less. Okay, transgender is when a person's biological sex does not align with their gender identity. When your biological sex does align with your gender, it's called being cisgender. Cis means same. So there's transgender and there's cisgender. There are many more transgender people than most of us are aware of. Sometimes a transgender person decides to express the gender they identify with in clothing, mannerisms, etc., or even to change their bodies with surgery. But some don't. Although most transgender people know from about kindergarten on that their gender and biological sex are not aligned, some keep it to themselves, simply living with the discomfort and with that feeling that they are not expressing their real selves. Why would someone choose to do that? Often it's because the cost of coming out is so high. Discrimination is a serious matter, and in some places, it's a matter of public policy. In March, North Carolina passed a law requiring anyone in a government-owned building, like a school, to use the bathroom that corresponds with the sex on their birth certificate. The Obama administration pushed back, threatening to withhold funding from states that discriminated in this way, but that effort's tied up in the courts now. And last week, the Supreme Court temporarily blocked a lower court order that had allowed a transgender boy to use the boys' bathroom in a Virginia high school. These laws are popping up or trying to pop up all around the country. If you can't use the restroom that matches your appearance on the outside, and attempting to use the other one could result in an assault, what are you going to do? How do you spend 8 hours per day at school without using a restroom? And this kind of thing affects a lot of people. North Carolina alone has about 44,750 transgender residents. There are 1.4 million transgender adults in the U.S., or it's 0.6% of the U.S. population. That's about twice as many people as identify as Unitarian Universalist, by the way. Let's all bring a friend next Sunday, yeah? There isn't very good data on the number of transgender children, but we know they are there also. Social conservatives have tried to convince the public that if we allow transgender people to use the bathroom that matches their sense of their gender, some of them will use that opportunity to sexually assault cisgender people. That's the fear-mongering, that's the argument. But the truth is that there has never been any recorded case of a transgender person sexually assaulting a cisgendered person in a public restroom. It just doesn't happen. In fact, what does happen is the opposite. Transgender people are assaulted by cisgender people. A transgender person is killed in the US every 2 weeks, and worldwide it's a daily occurrence. Non-lethal abuse is even more prevalent. Transgender people experience not only high levels of violence, but because of discrimination, they also face high levels of unemployment, homelessness, and poverty. Many are shunned by their families. The difficulty of many transgender people's lives is so overwhelming that a whopping 41% have attempted suicide, not just thought about it, but attempted it. And this is compared to 1.6% of the general population. We know transgender intersects with other issues like unemployment and healthcare. It intersects even with immigration. Think of a transgender immigrant and the additional hurdles they face achieving legal status inside the US, and how likely they are, how much more likely to face persecution if they are deported. Trans people are also more likely to identify as racial or ethnic minorities, including African American and especially Latin American heritage, which means that discrimination against transgender people is yet another thing that disproportionately affects people of color. The Unitarian Universalist denomination, which honors the inherent worth and dignity of every person, celebrates human diversity, and it recognizes transgender discrimination as a human and civil rights issue. For 20 years, transgender has been affirmed and defended through our denomination's Office of LGBTQ Ministries. We ordain openly transgender ministers, and our denomination actively helps them find congregations to serve. And today I'm really proud to share the pulpit with a transgender member of our congregation, someone who I got to know through her volunteering at the church office, serving on the Social Justice Committee and the Diversity Task Force, a person who is a force of nature and who has offered to share her story.
Gee, I hope I can follow that build-up. Wow. Thank you, Angela. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Donna Tara McCoyne, and most of you know me as Tara. 17 years ago, before anyone here, including my wife, knew me, my name was Douglas Thomas Schwartz, and I was working for the Daytona Beach Post Office. My outside surface appearance seemed to be very good. I was in recovery from alcoholism for 6 years, which was a family trait. Both my parents had died from alcohol-related diseases. I seemed to be happily married. I had a super well-behaved, honor roll 18-year-old daughter and was an active member of Unity Church of Greater Daytona. Unity there had the nickname of being the 12-step church. I would see members of Unity at various AA and Al-Anon meetings that I also attended. One of Unity's sermons one Sunday was entitled, Unity and the 12 Steps. With my past history, I was definitely in the right place. I was in good health, a member of the Daytona Beach Track Club, and we met every Sunday morning at 6:30 a.m. for a 9-mile training run. No way I could be out drinking the night before a 9-mile run. And finally, my dream to be in elective politics seemed to be coming true. After a neighborhood town hall meeting on economic development that I had spoken at, the vice mayor for economic development of Port Orange, the suburb of Daytona I was living in, informed me that I had the best ideas of any single individual they had heard at their meetings, and would I run for city council in the next election. I was promised I would get all the support of the powers that be so I would win. However, I had to say no to my dream. In August of 1999, I was diagnosed with lymphoma in my right femur bone, and I was told I had a 70% mortality rate. To put it bluntly, that sucked. Here I was, finally the good guy, and it looked like the light at the end of the tunnel was very close. Now, this was where my big secret I had been carrying around all my life came into play. I had known since I was 5.5 that I should have been a girl. I was a very shy, introverted child who overcame this at the age of 16 by discovering that alcohol allowed me to fit into society as a man. In the words of the old Saturday Night Live skit, I was a wild and crazy dude. By the time I was 45, I was in really bad shape. I ended up going to recovery, and on this August 23rd, I have been sober now for 23 years. I celebrated by having a double chocolate milkshake. But seriously, to me, this is no big deal. It's just something I have to do to have a life. Now, upon having and recovering from cancer, it was nowhere as bad as the doctors thought it was. I had made myself a promise that if I had recovered, I was going to live my life as who I really am, a woman. However, I figured I was going to die and be mourned as the poor guy who straightened himself out only to get struck down by a horrible disease. And let me tell you something, I was really liking that ending a lot. However, the goddess had a different plan for me. Seems she wanted me to be a woman. How do I know that? I was testing the butcher knives one afternoon in my kitchen. I wanted to see which was the sharpest so I could end my life. My wife was at work, my daughter at college, where she had a full scholarship. Remember, I mentioned earlier she was a great kid? Anyway, this little voice said to me, "Put down the knife and go be the best woman you can be." That was November 11th, 1999, Veterans Day, and I will never forget that day as long as I live. I finally came out to my family in January 2000 and was promptly disowned by every member in said family. They have not had any relationship with me since. At the time, did that break my heart? Yes, it really did. Especially with my daughter. We were extremely close. Did my coworkers accept me at work? No way. They referred to me as it and the social experiment. However, because I was determined to have my sexual reassignment surgery, I persevered and had surgery February 8th in Chonburi, Thailand. You may ask, why there? Dr. Supinlan's work seemed to be the best in the world and the least expensive also. So I returned to the United States on March 1st, 2001 as a woman and was immediately discriminated against, being referred to as sir by a very snarky airport worker in a very snarky tone. I will never fly from Detroit again. On my return to work, things got worse. One day on my route, I had 5 teenagers approach me. They began circling me like sharks around and around and around, saying very nasty things to me. Finally, one said, "Let's pull down its skirt and see what's between its legs." Well, at this point in time, I had had enough, and I dropped the male on the ground. I had been a boxer and a kickboxer formerly as Doug. I said to them, "You'll get me, but I'll kill at least 2 of you first." They left, and a half hour later, this all caught up to me, and I was a hysterical wreck. The post office, in their infinite non-understanding, told me to finish my route. I brought the rest of the mail back, put it down, said, "You finished the route," and went home sick. I got a doctor's note saying I was suffering from emotional trauma, and I took the next week off. Work really didn't get any better, and I retired the first day I could. Problem solved. I applied for a job where I was living in Ocala, Florida. And I was highly qualified for this job, and it was one I really wanted and could have done very well. When a background check revealed I was transgendered, I was told I didn't fit in and I was not hired. That can't happen now thanks to President Obama. He, through an executive order, has outlawed the Social Security Bureau from having anything but your present name on your Social Security background check. And this was done to protect transgender people when it was found out that they were previously the other gender. This case of discrimination really hurt. I got a job as a substitute teacher in Marion County school system, which is still really a redneck Bible Belt of Florida. We have a saying about Marion County: there's a Bible in every pocket and a church on every corner. After complaints by students, parents, and teachers, I was told to resign. Seems I was offending others just for being me. There were snide remarks made about me out in public too, and if I heard them, I usually handled it by giving them what I called my look. I moved to Gainesville, Florida, which just added gender identity to their protected status, and I was hired by the Alachua County School Board as a substitute teacher. This was 2008. The difference was like night and day. In the schools there was no discrimination at all. Certain teachers always asked for me because they knew I would do a good job during their absence. Students said hello to me in public places because they appreciated me as a good teacher. I have had a few young women I have met come to me at times for advice. One often refers to me as her mommy. Her real mother disowned her, and to this day, since 2003 when we met, she has told me that she has adopted me as her mother. That's made me feel very good after my own daughter's situation. I met my wife in December 2009. She is cisgendered and has always totally accepted me for me. Sometimes I wonder about her sanity, having lived with me 6.5 years, but then I remember we are both just a tad eccentric. Notice the hair. I am not saying there is not discrimination today. We all know there is. We have many laws passed or being proposed against the LGBT community. But I refuse to accept this as a condition for living today. I became an activist so I could help fight discrimination, hoping others would not have to go through what I have done through. Throughout my activist years, I have done a lot. But I would say the highlight for me is being the North Central Regional Coordinator for the National Equality March, October 15, 2009. I was also chosen to be the presenter of the Transgender History Workshop that day before the march, and was the pagan priestess at the ecumenical service the morning of the march. Today, I am a member of Trans New Mexico's Speaker Bureau and Equality New Mexico. I am employed now as the Assistant Office Manager of a progressive firm fundraising for the American Civil Liberties Union here in Albuquerque. Today, I consider myself an activist for social equality, economic justice, and sexual equality. I am a pagan today simply because I have not any pagans who discriminate against LGBT people. Many pagans are LGBTQ because of this reason. When I joined UU of Gainesville, I mentioned I did so because it was the only church around that didn't discriminate against a transsexual light white witch, which is one who practices magic to help others. Am I sorry I transitioned? No way at all. If anything, I wish I had done it earlier. I regret it at times not having a girlfriend, or not having a girlhood, or being a young woman. However, today I look back on a great life since transitioning. Yes, I lost a biological family, but I have an awesome family of choice, one that is not prejudiced because of what you are, but accepts you for who you are, and that includes all of you. I have had the opportunity to write and lecture throughout Florida and also in Chicago Atlanta, and Washington, D.C., and now New Mexico. Transitioning allowed me to become the assertive, activist, open-minded woman I am today. And I am so very grateful for the cancer that changed my life and made it so much bigger and better than I could have ever expected. Finally, I want to thank Reverend Angela for asking me to be part of this service today on an issue that will always be near and dear to my heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tara, for sharing your story.
You're welcome.
As her story makes so clear, policies to prevent discrimination make a big difference in transgender people's lives, just as anti-sexist policies have in the women's rights movement and anti-racist policies have in the racial justice movement. It's also important for there to be diversity-loving communities, and that's what First Unitarian is. We love diversity, and we're continually learning to be better at honoring it. So we're going to close with a few tips on how to be welcoming to our transgender friends.
Number 1, please use the name and pronoun a person requests.
Usually, a person with feminine gender expression wants to be referred to as she, and a person with male gender expression as he.
Sometimes it's hard to tell. If you aren't sure what to say, whether to say he or she,
and if you really need to know,
ask.
Ask, what pronoun do you prefer?
Most people will take it as a sign of respect.
Number 2, respect a transgender person's right to disclose whether they are transgender for themselves.
Rather than making assumptions or speaking on their behalf. Not everybody is as open as I am.
Number 3, please don't ask for personal medical information.
You wouldn't ask a man at a social hour if he's had a vasectomy, would you?
It's the same with sex reassignment surgery. A person may choose to share that information with us, as Tara did when she was sharing her journey, but it's too personal to ask about.
And number 4, respect everyone's right to choose the bathroom that matches their gender.
The bathrooms in this sanctuary building have signs that invite people to use the restroom in which they feel most comfortable gender-wise. And anyone who would rather have a bathroom to their self for any reason is welcome to use the ones in the social hall. Those have main doors that lock. Lately, the public conversation about transgender people and others has often been harsh. So I invite you to join me in a closing song today that affirms diversity and boldly proclaims our love of neighbor. Please rise in body or in spirit to sing from the Teal hymnal, number 1053. Go in peace, friends, and may love bless you and keep you until we gather again. Blessed be.